Today's daf is daf Sadi Beis, and we'll start here on the bottom of Sadi Aleph on the Beis, 3 lines up from the bottom. Omar Rami Bar Chama. Ruvain shemochar soda l'shimon shelo b'achrayus. Ruvain sells a piece of real estate to Shimon without achrayus, which means that if Ruvain has an outstanding debt and he defaults on the loan, and his Baal Chov, the Malva, comes to collect, and there's nothing to collect from, then he has recourse to collect from the Lokeh, from Shimon. And Ruvain makes a stipulation in the sale to Shimon that he's not responsible to reimburse Shimon in event that Ruvain's Baal Chov, the Malva, comes to confiscate the karka from Shimon. Also Shimon, umechara l'Reuven, the very same piece of karka that had on it a lien that was sold from Ruvain to Shimon without achrayus, is now being sold back from Shimon to Ruvain. However, Ruvain, in this case, demands achrayus. The achrayus means he demands that in event that the karka is taken away from his possession, that Shimon will reimburse Ruvain for the monies that Ruvain paid to buy the karka. And here we start the daf for today, daf Sadi Beis. We also Baal Chov de Ruvain, the Qatar Flamine. And indeed, what happened at the end of the day was that Ruvain's Baal Chov, meaning a Malva that had lent money to Ruvain, came to collect his debt. Ruvain, as we said before, did not have money to pay back his Baal Chov. The Baal Chov, therefore, had recourse to collect from Mishubadim. And this halva that had taken place, in which monies were lent to Ruvain, took place before the sale of the karka to Shimon. So the loan predates the sale to Shimon, which means that the Baal Chov now has rights to collect this chov from Ruvain, even though in between the karka was in the possession of Shimon. Shimon had purchased the karka from Ruvain, but it doesn't matter because when Shimon bought that land from Ruvain, there was already a lien, a shibud on that land to the Baal Chov of Ruvain. And therefore the Baal Chov has rights to take away the karka from Ruvain. And now Rami Bar Chama wants to know, what is the halacha? Does Ruvain have rights to get back his money from Shimon? Why? Because now that his Baal Chov is coming to collect this debt, and he's confiscating the karka which Ruvain now had purchased with full price from Shimon, and when Ruvain bought that land from Shimon, Shimon had accepted upon himself in the context of that sale achrayus. Ruvain now wants to cash in on that achrayus. After the land is confiscated by his Baal Chov, he comes to Shimon the seller, and he says to Shimon, I want my money back. You have to reimburse me because you sold it to me by achrayus. And the commentaries point out over here that the logic of Rami Bar Chama, as we'll soon see, to obligate Shimon the seller to reimburse Ruvain based on the fact that he sold the karka to Ruvain b'achrayus, what compels Rami Bar Chama is that, let's say Shimon had sold the karka b'achrayus to another person, and that karka had a lien on it or as a result of Ruvain. In other words, Ruvain had borrowed karka, had borrowed money from his Baal Chov, and then after Ruvain had borrowed that money, there was a lien on that property, and he sold the property to Shimon. If Shimon sells the property to anyone on the face of the earth, then that buyer is buying a karka that's mishubedes, that has a shibud on it, based on the chov of Ruvain. And if that be the case, when Shimon sells the karka, let's say to Levi, and the Baal Chov of Ruvain, based on the fact that when Shimon sold the karka to Levi, it already had a shibud based on the halva, the chov that Ruvain owed to to some other person. When that person, the Balchov, the Malva of Reuven, comes to confiscate the karka from Levi, certainly, no doubt about it, Levi now has recourse, and so far as the fact that Shimon sold him that karka b'achrayus, is to go back to Shimon and say, I want my money back. You have to make good and redeem that money. So what difference does it make whether Shimon sold the property to Levi or sold the property to Reuven? In both cases, since Shimon sold the property b'achrayus, if that property is confiscated, is ripped out from the hands of the lokech, in this case from Reuven, and it wouldn't make any difference between Levi and Reuven, then that buyer, in this case Reuven, has recourse to go back to Shimon and say, Shimon, you sold me a karka with achrayus, you now have to make good for that achrayus. And that's what Rami Bar Choma says over here. We'll soon see the dissenting view of Rava. Dina hu de azil Shimon u'mafatzile. Shimon has no choice but to return the most that were paid to him by the lokeh, by Reuven in this case, return it to Reuven because he has achrayus. That's called in the language of the Shas mefatzile. Mefatzile lefatzoso in modern Hebrew. And it means that he has to make good for the sale because he had made a sale to Reuven b'achrayus. And now we're going to get to Rava's dissenting view. Omele Rava. Rava says to Rami Bar Chama, Nehid achrayus the alma kabule. While it's true that he accepted achrayus in a general sense, meaning Shimon, when he sold the field, he accepted achrayus. If there was another balchov who would come along and confiscate this property, let's say Shimon had borrowed money and he had an outstanding debt, and now his debtor, his creditor, his balchov would come and confiscate the property from Reuven, and for sure Shimon would have to pay up. But in this case, the malva is really collecting from Reuven himself. And achrayus the nafshe mi kibole. The achrayus is the alva. The achrayus is vis-a-vis other people who had outstanding chovos, or Shimon himself who had an outstanding chov. But vis-a-vis the balchov of Reuven, certainly Shimon was never makabel achrayus. He wasn't makabel achrayus that if the balchov would come and be torei from Reuven because of Reuven's debt to that balchov, that now he would replace that money to Reuven. That doesn't make any sense. If Reuven was the one who was responsible for the treifa because he was the one who borrowed money, now he's going to get his money back, and Shimon is going to now give back his money based on the fact that the balchov is coming to collect from Reuven because Reuven owes his money. That doesn't make any sense. However, the Gemara now is going to limit the statement and the scope of Rava. Umode Rava, Rava would concede to Rami Bar Chama in the following scenario. The Reuven sheyorash Sodom Yaakov. So Yaakov is the father, he dies, and he leaves over an estate to his son Reuven, who inherits that Sodom from his father Yaakov. Now Reuven goes ahead, umechara l'Shimon b'lo achrayus. He sells the land to Shimon. He says, I'm not in any way responsible if a balchov will come and based on his shibud confiscate that karka. I'm not going to reimburse you for that. The asa Shimon umechara l'Reuven b'achrayus. Now, like the previous case, Shimon, having purchased this land from Reuven below achrayus, sells it back to Reuven b'achrayus, which means that if someone would come and take the karka out of the hands of Reuven, who's now the lokech, the buyer, Shimon will reimburse him. He'll be mafatzeh him. The asa balchov de Yaakov. It wasn't that Reuven borrowed money and his malva is coming to take away this karka based on his shibud, rather his father Yaakov had borrowed money. So there was a shibud on this karka for an outstanding loan that Yaakov owed to the balchov. And with Yaakov's death, because Yaakov had obviously not paid off that chov, there's a shibud on the karka which was inherited by Reuven by virtue of the chov of Yaakov. And therefore, the Katarif Lebinei, when the Baal Chov of Yaakov, may rest in peace, comes to confiscate the properties of Reuven, Dinahu, here Rav agrees to the din of Rami Bar Chama, the Azil Shimon Mafatzi Lebinei. Shimon is going to have to reimburse Reuven for the monies that Reuven paid to buy this karka b'achrayus. My time up. The Gemara now clarifies why is Shimon responsible through achrayus to pay Reuven and return the money that he paid for the karka to Reuven. And the answer is the Balchov the Yaakov ki Balchov the Almadam. Rava's point was that when Shimon sells a property to Reuven, Bachrayus, Shimon excluded Reuven if Reuven himself was the Loven. If he owed the Chov to the Balchov, to the Malchut. And Shimon was basically implying implicitly that he's not going to take on responsibility for a chov for monies that Reuven himself owes. But in this case, it's not Reuven who owes as a son, it's really Yaakov, his father, who owes the chov. And therefore, there's no difference between a chov that came the Alma and was confiscated by the Balchov from Reuven, and a chov that came through Reuven's father on a field that was owned by Yaakov and then was inherited by Reuven. The Balchov at the end of the day is coming to collect from Yaakov. Although Yaakov is not alive, but it'll correct for the Sheba that was generated by that chov on the field of Yaakov. And that's no difference than Balchov di Alma, which there was never a debate, and even Rava would agree and concede to the position of Rami Bar Chama. As far as a chov bialmo, with the exception of a chov that's owned by the lokeach, that's owed by the lokeach, Reuven, to someone else. But here it's not Reuven's debt. It's a debt that's inherent in the karka that he inherited from his father, but it was really his father's debt. Weiter. Omar Rami Bar Chama. Reuven shemochar sodeh. Now, in this case that we're about to learn, there's no machlokas between Rava and Rami Bar Chama like there was in the previous case. But Rava is going to try to find a loophole in this ruling of Rami Bar Chama, in which Shimon could somehow circumvent a claim of the Yisomim on the Dmei HaKarka. So let's see the case. Reuven shemochar sodeh l'Shimon b'achrayus. Okay, in this case, Reuven has achrayus, and that means he accepted upon himself a monetary obligation that in event the karka is taken away from Shimon the Lokeach, Reuven the mocher will reimburse him for his monies. But Shimon never gave the money, the sale price, those mos were never given over to Reuven. He took it on credit, which is called Zakif Olav B'Milvin. Umeis Reuven, now Reuven dies, and Reuven had previously borrowed money from some Balchov. So there's a shibud on Reuven's property. The Asa Balchov de Reuven, since Reuven did not pay up the chov, and he doesn't have the most to pay up the chov, and he didn't get paid by Shimon who bought the field, there's a shibud on this karka vis-a-vis the Balchov of Reuven, and Reuven's Balchov now comes to cash in and to confiscate the property from Reuven, the Keturah Levi Shimon, but Reuven had already sold the property to Shimon. But it doesn't matter, he sold the property of karka mishubedes, and therefore the Balchov has recourse to collect and confiscate this karka from Shimon the buyer. Reuven had accepted upon himself achrayus. And now what happens is, after Reuven's Balchov confiscates the karka from Shimon, Paise bezuzeh, Shimon gets up And he doesn't want to give up his karka. He's very attached to the karka that he bought. Obviously, if he bought it, there was a motivating reason for him to buy it. Maybe he's a bar metzger even. And now he figures, let me strike up a deal with this Baal Chov who's coming to collect and rip out this karka from my possession, and I'll pay him up the value of the Chov. It's my rights to redeem this karka by paying the value of the Chov. The Chov was given in hardcore cash, in liquid assets, to the tune of 10,000. I'll give him the 10,000. But in effect, by giving him the 10,000, although he's holding on to this karka, he is paying up the Chov of Reuven, who sold him the karka. And therefore, says Rami Bar Chama, Dinahu di Amri Le b'nei Reuven. Now, what happens is, after Shimon paid up the Baal Chov of Reuven, and again, keep in mind that Shimon had not yet paid his dues, paid up his money for the sale. Now Reuven dies. Never, right? And Reuven leaves Yisomim. The Yisomim want to collect any debt that was owed to their father. In this case, the debt of Shimon, who bought karka from Reuven on credit. Shimon says, I don't want to pay up this sale because, in effect, I gave that money back to Reuven by paying his Baal Chov. Such a compelling logic of Rami Bar Chama that even Rav is going to have to concede in this case. Shimon could withhold the funds to pay back the Yarshim of Reuven in lieu of the fact that he bought the father's karka on credit, because he says, I paid up the loan that your father owed to so-and-so. So why do I have to give you money when I took the money that your father had owed on an outstanding loan, and he took a achrayus for that loan? So therefore I have rights to go back and get back my money. Again, I never paid you the money, but I paid it to someone else on behalf of your father. So that means that your father Reuven did not bequeath to you a loan to that Baal Chov because I paid up that loan on his behalf. Says Rami Bar Chama, Dinu di Amri Le b'nei Reuven, Anon mitaltali shavak avun gabach, umitaltali biyasme leBaal Chov lo mishtabde. Whoa! The Yisomim, the heirs of Reuven, came up with a chap, an argument from left field. And what is that argument? You know why you have to pay me up the Dmei Asada that you purchased on credit from my father? That's because Anan mitaltali shavik avun gabach. What my father left by you was not karka, but rather was metaltali, meaning you owe damim to pay up for the purchase of the field that you bought from my father. And now, when the Baal Chov of my father comes to collect his chov, he has no rights to collect from metaltalin. He only has shibudim on karka. If the Baal Chov would come to us to collect the chov, he could not collect the chov because all that my father left, all that our father left for us in the estate was metaltal. He didn't leave any karka. And metaltal the yasmi leBaal Chov lo mishtabde. So had he come to collect from, in other words, Shimon's argument is that I paid up a chov that you yourselves would have had to pay off had the Baal Chov come to you. But that's not true. Had the Baal Chov come to them, we, the Yisomim, would claim we don't have any karka. All we have is metaltalin. And metaltalin the yasmi leBaal Chov lo mishtabde. So in effect, You Shimon did nothing else, nothing at all to be marviach us, as if to say to pay up a chov that we would have paid off ourselves because we wouldn't have had to pay up that chov. The Baal Chov would not have the wherewithal to collect the chov from us. You're coming and claiming, but our father sold you a karka b'achrayus. And that's a very solid argument that our father really accepted upon himself a chov, that if the karka would be ripped out of your possession, he would reimburse you for that. That doesn't apply to us because we're not mechuyavim, we're not obligated in the chov of our father because he didn't leave us any karka. When did the Yisomim have to pay up a chov that was incurred by their father, and the Baal Chov comes to collect from the Yisomim? That's only if there's karka that's mishubedes. But an event that my father did not leave me any karka, he only left me metaltalin, then the Baal Chov has no recourse to collect from the Yisomim of the lover, or in this case of the mocher. So that even though the mocher is like a lover now because he accepted achrayus vis-a-vis his lokeach Shimon, but nevertheless, that chov cannot be collected from the Yisomim because Yasmei metaltlid Yasmei l'val chov lo mishtav. So basically, we could say that Shimon hiniach ma'osav al keren hatzvi. He threw his money to the wind. So it's so interesting here that the Baal Chov had rights to collect from Shimon. And the reason for that is that when Reuven borrowed money from the Baal Chov gained a shibud in these nechasim, in this karka. Now he can collect that karka confiscated from Shimon. If Shimon wants to take the option of paying him off with cash, that's fine. But basically takes the loss. And now when he comes back with achrayus to the seller is gone. So what's he going to do? He's going to come back to the Yisomim and say, well, you owe me a chov. But that only makes sense if the Yisomim's chov was paid up through this shibud. That's what achrayus is all about. Achrayus means I'm selling you a piece of karka, and in event that karka will be used to pay up a chov that the mocher owes, and the shibud was generated by that chov. So since the mocher is not capable of paying the chov, and the Baal Chov now has recourse to collect it from the shubadim from the lokeach, in that case, the mocher has achrayus. Why? Because that chov is an outstanding chov that he owes to the Baal Chov. But in event that he dies and the Yisomim inherit him, if they don't have any karka and there's no way of collecting a shibud, they are basically alleviated from paying their father's chov. Comes on Rava with another chap. And Rava wants to see if he could get Shimon to get his money back from the Yisomim of Reuven. And that's called Pikeach. Omar Rava Pikeach Idach, if Shimon had a good lawyer who would give him the right advice and recommendation, then you know what he should do? Madvi lahu nehile ara. Shimon made a big mistake vis-a-vis his own selfish situation by paying up dumin, by paying up cash and redeeming that karka vis-a-vis the Baal Chov who came to collect the karka. And he says, no, here, take the money. He should have paid with karka, but you know what he should have done? Before paying the karka to the Baal Chov, which would be in effect another big mistake, because once again, when Shimon giving up this karka to the Baal Chov of Reuven comes to the Yisomim of Reuven can say, well, we don't have any karka, so we didn't have to pay the Baal Chov because we don't inherit the chov of our father. What Shimon could have done if he was well recommended, advised, he could have paid up his chov to the Yisomim with karka, right? He, in effect, owes a certain chov to Reuven's Yosha because he bought this karka on credit, Zakov Lov Milva. And you know what? Magbilu Nihile Ara. He should give the Yisomim a piece of karka in lieu of payment for that karka. But which karka is he going to give to the Yisomim in order to pay up for that karka? He'll give him back the same karka. And then Hadar Govi Levi Nayu. And then he can reclaim that karka as payment for the achrayus that Reuven took when he sold the karka. It's an unbelievable chagad over here, because once Shimon pays karka in lieu of the zakfal of milva to the Yisomim of Reuven, the Baal Chov now has recourse to collect that chov of their father Reuven from the Yisomim. Because metaltali the asmi lo mishtabli lebal chov, but karkos mishtabli lebal chov. Now, once the karka was confiscated, then what are the Yisomim going to say? We don't have a chrayas. We certainly do have a chrayas. And therefore, they're going to have to give the karka back to Shimon, and Shimon ends, full swing around, back to his karka. And this, the Gemara says, is all based on Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman. The Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Rabba bar Avua. Yisomim shegavu karka b'chovas aviyim. If there was an outstanding debt that was owed to the Yisomim, to the father of the Yisomim. So again, this is the reverse case. It's not a case where the Baal Chov comes to claim his chov from Reuven, who's dead, from the Yisomim of Reuven, but rather it's a case where the Yisomim are coming to collect a chov that was owed to their father. And what did they do? They went to the lover who had borrowed money from their father during his father's lifetime, and they collected karka in lieu of that outstanding loan and debt that was owed to their father. Now, let's get the story straight. Let's turn back the clock to Reuven. Reuven was both a malva and a lover. What do I mean? On the one hand, he was a malva and he lent out money, but on the other hand, he had other debts that, let's say, he had accrued over the course of time. He owed money to this one or to that one. He had borrowed money, or maybe he had tax money that he had to pay, and so forth and so on. So if Nachman says that in this case, Baal Chov, the malva of Reuven, their father, Ozer, Vigova, Osamehem, he can now collect that karka. Why? Because that karka they confiscated or received as payment from their father's lover, who owed their father money. So their claim to the karka is through the mechanism of Yerusha. There was a chov. They inherited the rights to collect that chov of their father, and they did so by collecting a piece of karka. In this case, that karka fell to them via Yerusha, and the Yisomim want to say, you know what? We don't have any liens on this piece of karka to pay off our father's chov. And the Baal Chov of my father, the malva of my father, has no right to take away the karka. But the answer is, says Rav Nachman, that karka belongs to them only by virtue of Yerusha. And if it's a Yerusha, their father, the Baal Chov, just like he can claim the karka from their father, he can claim it from them. Omar Rabba, now Rabba comes up with another halacha. Ruvain shemachar kol sedos of l'shimon. So now Ruvain sells all his sados with one shtar over to Shimon. And amongst the karka, the various sados that he sold to Shimon, there were three different categories of qualities. There was Idis, the best, Benis, the middle, and Ziburis, the worst. Chazar Shimon, Machar Sada Achas LeLevi. Shimon sold the Benanis to Levi. So what Shimon is left with now is only Idis and Ziburis. His Benanis was sold to Levi. Also Malchov de Reuven. Now, Reuven had sold the karka, and Reuven had also borrowed money. And that purchase, and that borrowing, that alva took place before he sold the karkos. And now Rabbah says the following, Ratza mizeh gover, Ratza mizeh gover. The Balchov who had lent money to Reuven has two options in front of him. He can collect directly from Shimon. Shimon is called the first shibud because Shimon was the one who bought karka from Reuven, and Reuven owes an outstanding loan. So comes along the Balchov of Reuven, he says, I want to collect from Shimon. Now Shimon doesn't have any Beinanis because he already sold the Beinanis. He now has rights to collect Idis. Now, why does he have rights to collect Idis when a Balchov collects Beinanis? And the answer is the following. Comes along the Balchov of Reuven and he says to Shimon, you bought all the karkos, all the sados of Reuven. You now stand in the place of Reuven. You enter into his shoes as far as the shibudim of the chov that's owed to me. And if I can find karka of Reuven, and now it's in your possession, I can collect my chov. I don't have to bother Levi, and such that Levi now will have to get his field, his Beinanis confiscated. Because when you purchased all the fields of Reuven, who owes me money, my lover, then although you sold a field that you had bought from Reuven to Levi, but nevertheless you still maintain ownership on other fields. And rather than collect from Levi, I want to collect from you, even though I have rights to collect from Levi because Levi purchased Beinanis. And the Balchov has a right to say to Levi, you bought karka that had a shibud on it, and therefore I have monetary rights to collect that karka because of the shibud that Reuven owes me on the debt. But nevertheless, Shimon himself is also on the firing line, meaning the Balchov of Reuven also has rights to collect directly from Shimon and to collect the best field, meaning the Idis that represents the value of that chov. And again, let's go over the logic of Rabbah, because since Shimon purchased all these karkos from Reuven, then the Balchov of Reuven has the right to say that if I can find one of the karkos of Reuven that's in your possession, Shimon, because you bought all of his karkos, I'm going to come to you to collect my chov. And that is based on the fact that, Levi also has a right to say, look, I didn't clear out all the karkos of Reuven that you had bought, Shimon. I left karkos of Reuven in your possession, Shimon. So you're still, so to speak, proverbially on the firing line. The shibud is still chal on yours. So again, the halacha of collecting from Beinanis in the case of Balchov doesn't mean that we're mafkir the shibud from other karkos. We're only saying that in event that there are many different types of karkos, then the Balchov will collect and it'll only get from Beinanis. He can't collect Idis. But it doesn't mean that there's afkas shibud on the Idis. And in event that that Ruvain sold all his karkos and the buyer sold Baininus, but still has karkos of Ruvain, then the shibud on the karkos of Ruvain, which expanded and filtered out to encompass all the karkos of Ruvain, will now be collectible even from Idis. But now the Gemara qualifies this. The Lo Amaran, and we don't apply this ruling that the Baal Chov has two choices, two options, either collect Idis from Shimon or Ziburis from Levi, Ella, unless it was the following scenario. Dizavna Beinanis, Dizavna Beinanis. The Baal Chov of Ruvain has recourse to collect from Levi because Levi purchased Beinanis. Zavna Idis v'Ziburis. If, let's say, when Levi struck up a deal to buy karkos from Shimon, these are the karkos that Shimon had bought from Reuven, he only bought Idis v'Ziburis. He deliberately left Beinanis in the possession of Shimon the seller. And Motzi Amarle, when the Baal Chov comes to collect from Levi, Levi has a right to counter argue. I took and purchased Idis and Ziburis, deliberately leaving Beinanis in the hands of Shimon. And if all things are equal, and there is Beinanis available for the collection of Reuven's Chov by Reuven's Baal Chov, then the Baal Chov will collect Reuven's Beinanis. And if you, Shimon, have Reuven's Beinanis, because I bought from you Idis and Ziburis, then you have only recourse and claim on the Beinanis that I left in the hands of Shimon, and you cannot collect from me later. Gemara goes even a step further in limiting this halach. Ubeinanis nami. And even in a case where Levi purchased Beinanis, and we said that in that circumstance, the Baal Chov of Reuven has rights to collect that Beinanis from Levi. That's one of his two options. Lo amaran elo de lo shavak Beinanis b'kavoseh. Which means that, let's say there were two fields that were Beinanis, and Levi purchased one of those two fields. So you would say, well, if Levi purchased Beinanis, then the Baal Chov of Reuven has recourse to collect that Beinanis from Levi. No. There was another field that was Beinanis, and that's called Beinanis b'kavoseh, like that same field that that Levi bought from Shimon. There's a similar, identical kind of a field that Shimon bought from Reuven, and Levi left that Beinanis in the possession of Shimon, the buyer.